Welcome to ACPE Day 2. I'm James Kelly with OETC, and welcome to Security in Student Health Environment, presented by Andy Kadott, Information Services Manager at Student Health Services at Oregon State University, and Dan Butler, Operating Systems and Network Analyst at Student Health Services at Oregon State University. After the talk, we're going to have a brief Q&A, so feel free to put your questions into the Q&A tab on the right side of the chat. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Andy and Dan.
Thanks. Hi, my name's Andy. I've been, kind of working in IT for over a decade now. Got my start at K-12 in Corvallis School District, where I've been at ACP a couple of years, and so thought I'd come and just share a little bit about what we're doing now at Oregon State University, so you can kind of get a overview of how we're keeping your students safe when they matriculate to higher ed. Dan?
Good morning, everybody. I am Dan Butler, Operating Systems Network Analyst here at Oregon State University. I've been doing IT and security for a little over a decade. I come primarily from the private sector. I've done small credit union work, all the way to working for the largest private firm in the United States, and then here at Oregon State University. And I am semi-excited to present today. As you know, us IT people are not always the most social, so I apologize for any awkwardness.
We'll be full of it. Thanks, Dan. So I just wanted to give a brief overview of what Student Health Services is and what we do for students and why it's important to have a Student Health Services. On campus, we are a healthcare provider for all students. Not only that, but we do a whole bunch of different services, and we're spread out throughout the campus. Currently, right now, we're at Plagueman, which is our main building, which is comprised of two buildings, one built in the 20s and one smacked in the 60s/70s. We have a newer building over at Tebow Hall, which is our quick care clinic. Say that 10 times fast. And we also have a collegiate recovery community, which is a place where if students are in recovery from addictions, they can live in this dorm and they attend classes and group meetings, and they get help that they need to stay away from like the party culture that can sometimes be ingrained into college. We have a whole bunch of different things we do. We do general interest, we do sexual health, we do sexual violence prevention, we do recovery, and we do alcohol and drug prevention. Among other things, we do communication and marketing out to other campus units and out to the broader sense of our community, to Corvallis, into other counties that we're in through our extension services. We also bring in people from other cultures to ask them, how are we doing? Is there anything that we need to do better? We vaccinate students from Men B when that was a whole thing. We had a whole huge mass vax clinic, and chances are we might have to do a COVID one as well. It's been nice that we've had the Reser and Samaritan being at Reser to give those shots. So we haven't had to do it yet. But as we transition into this, there's so much data that's flowing through all of our systems, and a lot of it is so secure that we need to make sure that it cannot be touched except by those who need it. Again, we have to balance that line of security and availability. So to start talking about that, I'll pass it over to Dan.
So some of those things that we have to look at, as many of you are aware in the education, is FERPA, staying FERPA compliant, protecting the records, student records, financial information, disciplinary files, student transcripts, and then most importantly for us, the immunization and health records. OSU is not currently a HIPAA environment. However, with how do we say this politely, constant pressure from us, they are looking at becoming a HIPAA hybrid environment, where they will fully, officially state we are fully compliant. And then on top of that, because we have many international students, we also have to take into consideration GDPR. Thankfully, most of those same compliance requirements, already fall into FERPA and HIPAA requirements. So, by following those, we'll easily be GDPR compliant as well.
And I apologize, my whole screen just went black. Like completely.
You see your slide.
Well, that's good. Oh, it might be coming back. No, not at all.
Wouldn't be an IT presentation without IT problems. While Andy is pulling that back up, I'll move into our next area. So what did we start with, and what's what did we want to share with you? When we came here to student health, and this is to no fault of the most recent director, it was a mess. And from what we understand from our director, when she had taken over, it was even worse. So our former director secured things to a baseline of, okay, we're getting by, we're not breaking any rules, all the data is safe, and that is when she hired Andy and I to come on and said, okay, make this better. What can we do to streamline this process? And I don't know, Andy, are you back?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Back. Yeah.
All right.
That was great. So yeah, we when we were brought on, it wasn't quite as civ. Like there was very good protection put in place, but what it started with before our current director took over, or our previous director, sorry, took over, there was a lot of holes before that, and it was a bit scary. So it's never okay to step into that and be like, to not know why these things weren't in place. And so we did a little bit of digging, and the things that we found were that the people that were hired to do this maybe didn't have the skills that they needed to complete the tasks that needed to be done. And a lot of it was just reacting to issues and trying to put out the fires when they happened, and not to have some preventative maintenance on it, and not to secure it in a way that had the least privilege, right? So some of the issues that we came into were broad border firewall rules. There was no local firewall on workstations or servers. The failover on the firewalls weren't tested, things like that. Dan, do you have more?
We had users that were remoting onto servers to accomplish their tasks and run their programs because it didn't work on desktops according to previous IT administrators. We had not fully unpatched VMware, but not super current. There were some things that were missed, that's kind of some of the stuff underneath the hood, and then no hardening on the VMware environment. And one of the big ones monetarily, we had technicians spending hours of each day diagnosing printer issues and manually installing printers on workstations that users roamed around on. Andy, you want to go over some of the other ones?
Yeah, another thing that we noticed when we first came in is on remoting into the servers, there was no multi-factor. It was just set to allow remote desktop users onto them. The admins were our own owned accounts. And so some of the things that we changed on that is, we asked for other service accounts to be an admin on the servers, and that was fine. We were told, yes, that's great. But then when we asked to implement multi-factor on them from the broader university, we got an answer of, well, we just don't do that here. And so part of securing an environment is knowing the best practices and knowing when an answer that you're giving isn't the one that you can accept, right? So, without breaking something, without doing anything illegal, part of that, part of this is shadow IT ops. We had to find a way to implement, multi-factor on those accounts. And so I just went out and did a free Duo account and tied those accounts to that service account, to that Duo. And so then we had multi-factor on our servers. And we weren't breaking anything. Everything was fine. We weren't doing anything illegal. So, that's one way of getting past those, well, we just don't do that here kind of answers. We didn't have a good password manager. We found that people were putting their passwords down plain texted on pieces of paper, on notepad documents on their desktop. What they thought was a secure environment in our shared drive, but actually had, some top level rules that gave access to people at the university. So if somebody was so enterprising, they could find those, get the passwords, and get some student PHI data, and that's terrible. We can't have that. So we implemented a password manager. Our first one didn't quite fit our needs. There was some promises on one end and some things that maybe we didn't understand when we got it, but we landed with a good one with Keeper, which is a really nice one. Another issue that we had is all of our desktops and laptops and workstation environments were being built by hand. There was no not golden image, but an image that made sense and was standard. We'd go to work on a device and find that it was 10 updates back from what it needed to be because it had been hand built and automatic updating hadn't been turned on. Or we'd go and find that it was a different version of Windows 7 even when we came on than what it should have been. And so one of the big things too was we built a Windows deployment server and got that started and made sure that everything was standard, so that we could, make sure that we were doing that, everything was getting updates and that everything got the standard security settings. Dan, do you want to go over email encryption?
Yeah. So one of the things that things we did when we got here and we got things kind of settled and into a spot where we said, okay, we've got a good baseline security, was ask people about what their thoughts were, what are things that they felt that we could improve on, and one of those was that kept coming up was email encryption. Now the email encryption we're using was good, however, people hated it. They absolutely hated it. The plugin crashed. It was confusing. It didn't have Active Directory integration. So folks had separate passwords. And then the pricing. We just weren't happy with the pricing. And so, we started looking around, and that was quite a journey. And I really encourage everybody. popping back to the last thing, the password manager, I was the mistake in the password manager. I was like, oh, this XYZ brand is great. I used it at this other place I worked. We should just get this. Well, it turned out it didn't have modern two-factor authentication, and it didn't integrate with our users. So, we lost out. We ended up having to pay for that product, and we couldn't use it because it wasn't up to the university standards. So, jumping back over to email, we did our due diligence on this one. We researched. We have a wonderful software team here at Oregon State University. It is something we are blessed with. They will fine-tooth comb any contract and ask the hard questions. And from that, I recommend, if you're going to look at email, if you're going to look at any contract, ask the hard questions. We sent out a HECVAT, which is I can't remember that. It's higher education, kind of like, hey, what are your practices at your business? And a red flag came up. This is a reputable dealer that they wanted us to start signing NDAs. We're like, no, we don't need NDAs. These are very basic questions, like, do you hard code passwords into your product? Just hard code them in there. They wouldn't answer it. So this went on for about three months, and we actually ended up dropping the whole thing and settling on Microsoft's built-in encryption. The university was able to get a BAA signed with Microsoft, and that has been a single button encrypt for our users, no additional plugins. It's available from the website, and it works with everything that's already here. So that was that. And then the next thing that one of the big things we addressed was single user local admins. We found that there was a single user with variations in name that was used on all of our workstations and had not been changed in quite some time. So one of the big things first, obviously, change that password. Let's get rid of that. And there was a great presentation yesterday that I was like, oh, we're going to talk about that. Oh, we're going to talk about that too. Oh man, we're just going to talk about these things all over again. LAPS is an amazing product for randomizing your local administrator password. And even so much that if you've got a remote worker, you can look that up, give it to them if there's some task that can't be achieved, and then go and push a password reset. They do have to be connected to your network, but you can just say, oh, part of this process, please connect to the VPN before we start this, and then that'll cycle that password. Let's see. So we didn't touch on some of the things. So move on to back to the firewall. One of the immediate things we did was to harden the firewall. Go through those rules, look at those, and one of the harder tasks, especially with firewall rules, is like, okay, I can set this and I can set this. Okay, great, it works. Okay, well, now if you want to narrow that down is when you start breaking stuff. When you start saying, okay, yeah, it's great. I'm going to put an ACL in place that only allows it from this subnet, and it goes to this. But okay, what are the exact services I need? Let's start narrowing those down. And that was not a fun process, and it's still one that's in place. And I recommend anytime you can, get an outside eye from a trusted source. We have some amazing folks here at the university that we have had said, hey, let's sit down. Okay, I've revamped these firewall rules the best that I think they are. What do you think? Where do you see this? Any issues? And can this be improved upon? Are we going about this a different way? Do we have another path, given our complex environment, that we can route things? So, and that kind of rolls into the workstation firewalls. Surprisingly, turning on our workstation firewalls was very minimal impact. We had a few local label printers that were shared, for saving money on not buying additional label printers, we just basically said, sorry, we're not going to support that scenario anymore, and have moved towards a network label printer, which we're currently testing. Our lab is doing that for us. So that solved our workstation firewall. And if you have vendors that say, oh no, your workstation firewall has to be turned off, you might want to question your vendors. Don't be afraid to push back and say, why? Why does this need local administrative access? Why does the firewall need to be turned off for this software? And put that back on them. Server firewalls, and we're talking about the local Windows firewall, that was a lot harder. We have a lot of varying services, all of which talk to each other in a variety of ways, using a variety of different protocols. And so on that one, I recommend, set this stuff up as much as you can in group policy. And I recommend, get your rules. First, obviously, test where you can turn things on and off easily. You can adjust things easily. Once you've done that locally on that one server and things are functional again, take those settings, copy them over to a group policy so that they will always be pushed onto that. And then the next step is leave the ability to turn the firewall off and on locally on the machine. So if there's a software update and everybody's like, oh my gosh, this service went down, and you suspect it's a firewall, you could still easily go and turn that off on the machine and say, yay, nay, it is or is not the firewall. Obviously best practices is to push that so it can't be disabled on the machine, but that comes with its own, inherited risks and time. Guess, do you want to jump back?
I can jump in. So yeah, another thing with firewall is start failover testing. Make sure that if you do have a failover set, you take a day in the weekend or after hours that you just test it. You don't know if it works if you haven't seen it work, right? Another big one, if you're using VMware, Hyper-V, any hypervisor to control your servers, make sure it's hardened. One of the things we did is we went through VMware's auditing of our system. There's a big 200-item document that Dan and I went through and just said, hey, are we meeting the best practices on all of these? Some we weren't, some we were. It all depends. We also found out that we thought that it was doing automatic updating, but it wasn't, so we had to actually implement that. So that's the kind of things that you find when you do audits on your systems. You get to discover, hey, is it actually doing what I wanted it to do? Standardize. Not only will standardizing fix security flaws that you might have to you haven't thought of, but by standardizing, you only have to essentially fix one problem. If you have, let's say, Chromebooks, Macs, desktop, Windows, Linux, now if there's a security flaw on a piece of software, you have to go and spend time on each of those to figure out how to solve that issue. So standardizing on printers, on naming conventions, on OS even is going to save you time, and it's going to help make it so you're not exponentially making that curve exponential of your support time. So another thing we did is we standardized on all our printers. We got rid of that time that our employees were spending by having to go, and we had a whole wall of print cartridges for all these onesie twosie like printers that we had out there. And so by standardizing, we got it to where they just send us the print cartridge. It's sent to the exact printer it needs to be, and then the users can install it, or they can just put in a ticket and we can do it for them.
Yeah, we had 12 different brands of printers spread out through our fleet. There might even been more than that.
Yeah, and not even brands. We had the brands plus units in that brand. So we had HP 640s, we had HP 1030Xs, whatever you want to call them.
I guess so. Sorry, 12 different models. Yeah, we had like 7 brands and like 12 or 13 different models. Yeah, I mean inkjets, laser jets. We had professional series. We had these tiny little home class units that are like those $20 throwaway, Staples special that you get at Thanksgiving that somebody was like, yeah, let's go get like 5 or 6 of those and put them into production. It was insane. And I think, can I say the name of our printer contract people?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, they're OETC company. So this is, again, lean on your resources. We lean on OETC, which is available, I think, to just about everybody here, or it's education stuff. Copytronics. Copytronics came in, took everything out. We have settled. We have 3 models total, and the only reason we have 3 models is because we needed a large MFP. We needed color, and then we just needed a standard black and white. They use a system called FM Audit. Throw it on your print server, and that was another thing we didn't really have a good version. It was a print server, so users, the techs would go. So a provider would get up, go to another workstation, log in. Hey, I can't find the printer in this room. The tech, they put in a ticket. The tech would leave, go up to their station, sit down, manually install that on their computer by searching for it on the network, and then come back. We installed the print server. We did a naming convention. So we have our Plagueman, Tebow, we have some other buildings, and we named them PL for Plagueman hyphen the room number hyphen print. So people could sit down. We put an icon on their desktop, double click, and say, oh, I'm in room 107 today. Double click 107, and they're done. FM Audit, when the unit gets below 25%, will automatically send to Copytronics. Copytronics will automatically ship out a cartridge. We've already got one sitting there, so they can change it out when it says out of toner, or they can just submit a ticket. But there's already another toner in transit. And I tell you what, that is, we've gone from 2 solid hours, and when I say that, I'm not exaggerating, 2 solid hours of printer issues a day down to about 5 tickets a month. And generally the 5 tickets a month are legit. The print server has done something funky. There was a paper jam, and the print server just didn't want to clear that. And so we had to go restart the spooler to, get it kicked off and back to normal. That's it. Most of our end users even change their own cartridges now. Even though we say, hey, send in a ticket if you don't want to deal with it. They do it on their own now because it's right there. It's quick. It's convenient. So highly recommend if your shop is doing more than a couple of tickets a day, more than 10 a week, look into a printer contract, and the savings can be phenomenal especially if you're ordering your own stuff. We've actually bought printers, we get on a contract, and we're still spending less than we were before on just our toner cartridges. That's not even including our man hours.
So yeah, so standardizing is a big part of that. You can also standardize by making sure that people have least privilege access. So a password vault. Using Keeper, using password managers, you can set up a vault to where the people that need access that need those passwords can get them, but the people that don't have access to them. And that way you can also set up randomized passwords. You don't have to have the same one for everything because the vault's readily available. And so somebody can go and get those passwords. You don't have to set it to a standard that everybody just has to remember, because I guarantee somebody's not going to remember that and they're going to write it down. And if that gets out, that's trouble. Email encryption. When we found out that the email encryption program that we were going to go with wasn't going to work, we reached out to our university IT and we said, hey, we've heard that Microsoft, that you have a BAA sign that we can use this for encryption. Is there anything that wouldn't work? Why couldn't we use this essentially? And we got the answer, no, go ahead. We're ready to test this. It's ready for production. So part of this as well is, and I'll jump into this right now, is we have a huge resource in our university. We are separated from them. We're our own little distributed unit, as we have our own IT shop, but we're part of the university as well. And when Dan and I came on, we were told by the employees that were there already that, oh, don't talk to UIT. They're not going to help you. They're just going to get upset with you when you ask questions. We got a real doom and gloom kind of story. And so when we came in and we were trying to do some things like set up our Windows deployment server and things like that, we were like, okay, we need some additional firewall rules in place. We need to make sure that our traffic's flowing right. So then we had I think one day we both looked at each other and like, should we just ask UIT about this? Like, we just need this rule set up. Let's just ask. So I remember the day I put in that ticket, I was like, oh boy, I hope I get yelled at. Put in the ticket, somebody called me and they were like, hey, yeah, what can we do to help? So that being said, we have a huge resource, and sometimes K through 12, we don't, right? So there isn't somebody to fall back on. Sometimes we have an ESD that we can go back to and say, hey, can you help with this? But ESDs usually want some money, right? They need something in return to give you some service. But what we do have, what K-12 does have, is we have a really tight-knit community inside of ACPE, right? If you have questions, put it in the ACPE chat. I've learned so much from just asking questions in there, and just fall back on each other and ask those questions of like, hey, are we doing this right? Who's done this before, right? So some of the things that we did to implement these processes and best practices is we just kind of did logical things. Like, we have 2-person reviews of all our rules. Like, hey, does this make sense before I push it? And we're like, oh no, actually, if you do it this way, it might break here. Dan and I have spent multiple nights, trying to fix things of where it's mostly just us saying, hey, does this make sense before I push it? Or does this, data map make sense? And the reason for that is this student data that we house is so important, because not only is it student data, it's data that's going to follow them for the rest of their lives. The things that they do at campus health-wise are part of their health record, and that'll follow them. And so I think Dan and I both have it in our mind every time we make a change, every time we're looking at something new, is like, how is this going to affect our systems, and how is this going to affect the student data? That's the thing that keeps me up at night, right? Is I never want to come to work or get a call in the middle of the night like, hey, data got out, and now we have to figure out what's going on. Dan, do you want to jump into the rest here?
Yeah. Where are we at? What did you learn? Got a cheat sheet here on the side because, as you know, when nerds get excited, they can talk for hours and hours, and I am definitely one of those people. One of the big things I would say we've learned is to mirror that is testing. If you don't set aside time to test, to back up, to ensure that your environment is in the place that you want it to be, it's going to jump out and bite you when you least expect it. Example of that, I made a very trivial firewall change in the middle of the day, which was not best practice, but it was like, oh, okay, I'm going to test this, getting this ready. I was trying out this new server. I was like, oh, this is no big deal. This won't do anything. Well, we hadn't tested our firewall failover yet. I put it in. There was an error with one of the definition updates. Cisco was kind enough to do that definition update for me in the middle of the day, which broke connection, which led to failover. So it failed over to the secondary firewall, which is all fine and dandy, except for nobody had tested it. The VLANs were incorrect on the interfaces. I believe the IP addresses were also incorrect on a couple of the interfaces. So we went down. Middle of the day, providers were not able to get to our electronic medical record system while serving patients. That was not a fun day. It was a lot of people standing at a door. Hey, when's this going to be back up? Do you have an ETA for this? And it's like, well, I'm working on it. So do those hard things. Plan on coming in on an evening and test the firewalls, test your rules, test your processes, test your backups. For if nothing else, please, people, test your backups. You never know when you're going to need to fall back to a backup. And if you haven't made that a regular event to at least test one of your backups, it's going to bite you. It really is going to bite you. Let's see. One of the big things we did learn, reputable vendors may not always be following best practices. Ask the hard questions. Ask them to fill out basic security questionnaires. And if they're unwilling to do it without an NDA signed, ask yourself why. Ask them why. Say, hey, and I did that with the email encryption. I said, well, why are we selling an NDA? Oh, well, there's maybe just some information we don't want people to see. And I'm like, okay, this is a pretty basic security questionnaire. This should be stuff you'd be willing to answer every day. And then future improvements. What are our future improvements? What are we working on?
Yeah, some of the future improvements that we want to do is start to look at bringing our services to the cloud. Right now, we're housed all on site, and as we move to the future and get more towards like a HIPAA environment or a HIPAA hybrid environment, then when we start to look at cloud services for our systems, we can start to put the pressure on our vendors to be HIPAA compliant. And then we can just say, hey, our routes are HIPAA compliant and our vendors are as well. So then when we get audited, if we ever do, we can say, yeah, we're all good, right? Another approach that we want to take is having a really tiered service account levels to our systems so that our main accounts aren't admins on workstations, that our workstation admins aren't admins on servers, that our server admins aren't admins on our Active Directory. Because if you get one of those compromised, then the only place they can go is to that one location, right? Especially the 81 is something you don't want to have happen.
Yeah, bad actors are moving laterally now. So if you have a shared, let's say, okay, my regular productivity user is a local administrator on all workstations, okay? Might not be an issue on my workstation, but let's say, okay, it moves laterally, gets onto Andy's workstation, okay? Andy's working on some new project with, somebody at the university, or he has a special share somewhere else. Now they can start to move up through the chain. And before you know it, they've moved up, they've moved laterally, and they've continued to just kind of poke around until they get up to a domain level, penetration. And then you're doing all kinds of stuff at that point. It's game over. And yes, is it more work to have to look up a local administrator password using something like LAPS? Yes. Is it worth it in the end? Absolutely. Make your productivity email account, the account you do presentations with, make that a regular account on all workstations, including your own. It's shouldn't be allowed. Block it. Block your regular account from logging onto server. Block your regular users from even trying to log onto servers. And that's one of the big things we're going to do is, okay, yeah, our users can't get on the servers, but what's the next level? Explicitly denying them. Creating a tiered approach, where you have your highest level, your domain controllers, there should only be one or two people functioning in your domain controllers. If you're using something like a Microsoft approach or many others, they call it tier 0. That is the highest level asset and only a couple people. And it should technically be accessed by a different device that's dedicated to that rabbit hole. Then you have your tier 1, you have your regular servers, then you have your tier 2, you have your workstations and your workstation admin accounts. Separate that stuff out, and especially if you're using a password manager, great. Now you've got it. You've got it set up. It's ready to go. You don't have to remember these special accounts. And it's just one more layer of security through depth. That you can report back to your higher ups. Oh, yeah. None of our guys are local administrators on any machines with their regular accounts. The places where you're clicking on these links, you're running these macros, things like that. And yeah.
Yep. So some of the important tips that we thought is, with any kind of security, you don't want to wait. There's never a good time to do it. You really just need to do the hard work, figure out a time where you can sit down after hours, flex some time. There's never a good time to get these up, because the best time to do it is before it happens, right? Shadow IT ops. If you get told, hey, we don't do that here, or that that's not something we can implement, don't break something, don't go the illegal route, but find a way to show that you have a vested interest in doing that security fix, right? Show that multi-factor does indeed contribute to an overall security environment. Document. You can't document enough, especially when you're told something like, hey, we don't do that here, or we just can't do that. Document it. It's going to save your job. It's going to save you in your reputation, especially when somebody comes back and says, why didn't we do this? And so you can document and say, hey, here's what I asked. Here's the improvements that we needed. And you told us, no, we can't do that. And so now you have a backup document, right? Part of that, though, go ahead.
I kind of want to poke on that for if there's any managers on the call, and I know this is easier said than done. Give your folks time to document their work. If a task takes an hour, plan on your technician spending 30 minutes, 45 minutes documenting that, so that one, you're not reinventing the wheel in the future, and two, you have that down. If something goes really, really wrong right after something like that is done, you can go back and follow those footsteps through that documentation and say, oh, hey, I bet this is where we're seeing this problem. So yeah, documentation, that is another thing that I would say that when we jumped in, there wasn't a lot of, and that we have massively pushed for, and even really made kind of a requirement to hear those key words when we're hiring somebody. If they say, oh, blah, 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 documentation, it's like ding, 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 ding. All right, I don't know who this guy is, but I want to hear more from him. Yeah, sorry.
No, not a problem. It is a very important thing to have, and I don't think it can be stressed enough. One of the things when you are bringing something to your leaders, your superintendent, the board even, is build trust. Don't use scare tactics. Really at that high content, like the high concept groups like that. It's all about context. And so you really just need to show, hey, if we implement this security improvement, yes, it will cost this much, but here's our break-even point, and here's why we need it. And put that at the front, so then they can kind of chew on that as you're explaining the why. And that's another point of building trust is, just being able to take the time and explain that why, and be very direct about why you need those security improvements. And so at this point, we have, we've kind of talked to you quite a lot. You might have questions, you might not. If you do have questions, just go ahead and put them in the Q&A, and we'll answer anything you have.
And I'll even say, furthermore, if you have questions, specific questions, detailed questions about, the endless rambling we did today, about a specific thing, you're like, oh yeah, I've been thinking about that. Feel free to reach out. One big thing that I've discovered working here at Oregon State University is collaboration, and that is both collaboration within our own university IT environment and also externally. I've seen some great ACPE forum, or the email digests that were going back and forth, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's right, we were talking about doing X, Y, Z. And I've also offered for some folks to reach out if they have questions, because I've run into some of these scenarios already. And really at the end of the day, the more eyes you can have on something, probably the better it's going to turn out. So does anybody have any questions? Also, thank you for coming and just listening to us rant for 45 minutes. I know a lot of this stuff was covered yesterday, in another session. It was a great session, but felt pretty good. It's like, oh, hey, we're saying all those same things, and this person's pretty legit. So
yeah, it's always nice to get consensus and not have to hear like, oh, we didn't think about that. But yeah, I don't see any questions here. If we don't have any, I'm happy to give us time.
Where'd our host go? I think we bored him.
Yeah, maybe.
He ran away.
I'm here. Just hanging out.
He just had to wake up. Yeah, I think we're good. I didn't see any questions.
Okay. Well, thanks so much, guys.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.